The Florida legislature will now begin the process of mid-decade redistricting on April 28th. It comes amid a nationwide map redrawing frenzy, with red and blue states carving up seats to give them the best shot at taking the U.S. House in November.
Do it! Just do it!
All right, guys, welcome back. I took a few days off to celebrate my 23rd birthday, had a great time fulfilling the WrestleMania bucket list, but we have returned and we have a lot to catch up on, so let's start by discussing the Virginia redistricting referendum that took place last night, because to be honest, I have some things to be enthused about. I have others that I'm extremely frustrated about. Let's start with the good news, though, which is, as we predicted, this was actually extremely competitive. It was very close. It was far from the 15-point Democrat blowout that we witnessed just a couple of months ago. And forecasting for the midterms, that is actually a positive sign for Republicans, right? When you watch a 13-point overperformance, that, first of all, greatly undermines the idea that Republican voters will never show up for a off-year election, because we actually watched rural conservative turnout, which dropped off in 2025, actually surge in this referendum, which is a positive sign, and frankly, I'm proud of our voters this time around. And secondly, you could argue greatly undermines the idea that Republicans are headed towards this inevitable bloodbath in the 2026 midterms. As a matter of fact, nothing is set in stone, which also brings up the exact reason why you have to try. And that's where I get into my frustrations here, because you just watched. This was super close, a 2-point election, right? Far from the deep blue Virginia that we had just witnessed. And yet the national GOP put little to no effort into this, into something that was extremely winnable. And you might ask, why should the national GOP care? Well, the reason is actually very obvious, because this naked Democrat power grab, they're going to now make a, I believe, 10-to-1 Democrat redistricting map that will affect the balance of power for the House in the 2026 midterms, right? It affects the national party. Obviously, it's going to affect their upcoming election and the ability of Republicans to maintain power in the federal government. And we had a strong chance of actually succeeding in this, and we barely put any money, barely put any effort, no attempt to actually turn out the voters here, who, by the way, still did a great job of turning out anyway. This really makes you sit here and say, come on, guys, what are we doing? And the same frustration, by the way, is true. Okay, so needless to say, right, there are no moral victories. This redistricting did happen, even if we did a good job as voters of pushing back against it in a generally blue-leaning state. But look at red-leaning states. Look at a place like Indiana, who just a couple months ago, remember that whole debacle, had the ability to counter this, to push back on the Democrats' inevitable attempts at power grabbing by doing their own partisan redistricting. And yet, what did they do? In the name of principles, they just stood down. They said, no, well, if we stop redistricting, maybe Democrats won't do it as well. And maybe we'll have more bipartisanship nationally, or less radical power grabs or attempts at playing politics or something. And then, of course, the national Democrats of other states looked at Indiana and said, oh, no, okay, well, Republicans are going to give us this huge ability to take power. We're going to do so, right? So you really have to look at the Republicans here and say, okay, the Virginia Democrats did what they did. Obviously, they're cynical. Obviously, they're pushing hard for power. But why aren't we doing anything to stop it? And then, of course, there'll be people who talk about, absentee balloting or something like that, mail-in ballots, right? And obviously, that is all true, and that has to be a conversation here. But let's be honest. We cannot keep saying elections are rigged when we don't even try, right? I mean, voters tried, but the national party doesn't make an attempt. It's like showing up for a test that you didn't study for and then saying the test was unfair. Well, at least try our best. At least put 100% maximum effort, because guess what? You can say all the elections are rigged, but we won in 2024. How did we do that? We won in Virginia back in 2021. How did we do that? Because remember the phrase too big to rig? You have to actually try. That's my central point, and that's frankly my huge frustration here. Now, that said, getting into today's coverage, it's also important to point out that this Virginia referendum might not be the biggest deal in the end, because first of all, it's facing severe legal challenges, although, to be honest, I'm not all that enthused about suddenly watching the courts go in our favor, but that'll be something to keep an eye on. On the other hand, at least we do have some Republican states, such as Florida, who are holding a special session next week to now counter the Virginia Democrats' attempt at redistricting. So it is possible that if we play all our cards right, we may still come out ahead. Obviously, DeSantis understands understands this issue. He's not pulling a stupid principled conservative act thinking that handing the left power will make you somehow a better person or something like that. But at the same time, we still have to have Rhino watch, because having, been a Florida resident for the past several years, I'll also tell you, as good as the governor is, a lot of the people within the state legislature often drop the ball, but this will be something to keep an eye on for sure. So the bad news is that we lost and there's no moral victories, and it's disappointing how we didn't try. The good news, however, is maybe there's an attempt now, or there's a chance to rectify this. We'll tell you about all of that, guys, in today's video. First, though, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. That's the best way to support our work, and it also ensures that you can stay up to date with all of the latest news and coverage. And that said, so first of all, just for the context of what the state of Virginia is, I want to remind everyone that just a few months ago, Abigail Spanberger, the current Democrat governor who claimed she wasn't going to redistrict and then did it anyway, but hey, libtards seize power, they lie, they gaslight, and then when they get into power, they go on a total libtard blitzkrieg. Again, why are we surprised by this? People really thought she was going to govern like a moderate. That's the funniest part of it all, right? Oh, wow, I got gaslighted by a Democrat on the campaign trail. You don't say. Anyways, nonetheless, let's not forget, Abigail Spanberger, just last November, won the state of Virginia by some 15 points, right? There's no other way to put it. In Virginia, you had a total Democrat wipeout. Even Jay Jones, anyone remember that guy? The crazy wanting to kill Republicans attorney general? Won by almost about 7 points, being largely carried there by the coattails of Abigail Spanberger. So let's keep in mind, we're dealing with a D+15 state. Many Democrats looked at this election and said, look, we're headed towards a total wipeout in the midterms. It's going to be a blue wave of epic historic proportions. Well, we now shift to the redistricting referendum that you saw just yesterday. You notice a drastically different result. 51-49. That was the margin. We lost by less than 100,000 votes. Of course, looking here at the rural parts of Virginia, you notice that turnout here was dramatically higher, right? Now, this time, people cared. People showed up to the polls in the proportions that they needed to. Honestly, if there were no consequences of this, you would look at this and say, oh, that's a pretty good result for Republicans, right? Typically, Virginia goes blue. Trump lost by about 5. We just lost by 15. Now we only lost by 2. Wow, that's generally good news, right? But of course, brings you back to the same exact question. If that's all true, if this was within 100,000 votes, you don't think if the GOP had put some tiny amount of money into this, maybe there would have been a chance we could have actually pulled it off? By the way, as we told you in our video covering this, we said there is a chance at this, right? This will be competitive. Less than 100,000 votes. We got there. I am proud of us. I would say again, looking at the Democrat overconfidence right now, oh, we're going to sweep the midterms. A result like this might not suggest that, right? Because it turns out not every election is the same. Vibes can change very fast. Just ask the Republicans who have the same arrogance back in 21 and then didn't get the result they wanted in 22. But that, of course, also assumes you have to try. And when you look at the cash difference here, it tells you everything, right? Again, the GOP didn't make an attempt. Democrat-aligned groups outspent Republican-aligned groups 3-1. In the Virginia gerrymandering referendum, Democrats spent $60 million of their dark money. You know why? Because they knew this was important. They knew that they had to try to do their power grab. Republicans, guess how much we spent? $20 million, right? If we maybe had matched the spending of Democrats, there's a chance we could have actually won this thing. And we just, I don't know what it is. Maybe we got demoralized, right? There was just this logic that, oh, did you see what just happened in Virginia? That means that we're going to lose again. There's no shot of it. Well, that's why I'm going to repeat here. That very thinking, that very demoralized view of just giving up on things, defeatism, right, is actually not a good world philosophy. But secondly, is not even true. Right? It's not even backed up by reality. But, there you have that. Apparently, Nick Sortor here is pointing out Republicans are spending more time trying to get John Cornyn over the top in the Texas primary over Ken Paxton, right? Something that you would really think the voters or President Trump ought to decide. But nope, that's where the RNC money is going. And in the process, we are doing what? Handing power to Democrats, allowing them to do, quite ridiculously, folks, a 10-1 redistricting map in a state that's not even 60-40 Democrat and yet they're going to get over 90% of the representation. It's utterly insane.
Virginia Governor Abigail Spanberger celebrating the win in yesterday's redistricting vote. Voters narrowly approving a new pro-Democrat congressional map in a controversial referendum that critics have slammed as a, quote, power grab. The outcome threatens the already very tight Republican House majority. Mark Meredith is live in Alexandria, Virginia, with more on this. And Mark, that vote ended up pretty narrow.
Bill, it sure did a lot narrower than some people were expecting, and Virginia voters showed up in huge numbers.
So yeah, again, we could have had it. We came so close, and yet we barely tried. Imagine if the National Republican Party actually put any money or effort into this thing, but still, there are no moral victories, and so we need to be honest about what the consequences of this will be. As Luke puts it here quite well, Virginia Democrats are saying they aren't the bad guys. They're just responding, as they claim, to Texas gerrymandering, despite the fact California already claimed they're doing that. And so what's happening now is actually Democrats are taking the opportunity to out-gerrymander the Republicans, largely because of the fact that Republicans are just standing down and allowing them to do it, right? You have states like Indiana saying, we won't do it because of principles or something. And this is the result, right? Texas kind of opened the game, which was the right thing to do, but all the other Republican states had to come back them up, right? You knew Democrats were going to retaliate. That's why all the Republican states had to keep following up. But, you know, this is, of course, not what the Republican Party does, because we just love to be defeated. But anyways, here is the math on it, right? Texas's proposed map represents Republicans by about like 21% extra in the state, right? This is less of a gerrymander than the maps of California and Washington, which are plus 23%, Maryland plus 26%, and New York 18% there, right? So what this is to say, you notice that even the redistricting or the gerrymandering that Democrats are doing right now is more aggressive, while they're claiming the fairness here, right? More aggressive than the gerrymandering that Republicans are doing over in Texas. But you notice things like this too right here. When Republicans were in charge, they voluntarily held a vote to move to nonpartisan redistricting, which was passed by voters with 2/3 support, right? A clear majority, overwhelming bipartisan consensus, 2/3. Now that Democrats won by just 1%, they're totally abolishing this. 1%, right? Totally abolishing this and citing Texas as a moral justification for undoing that to now a 10-1 Democrat map in a state, again, that Kamala Harris only won by about 5 points. That is totally insane. At the same time, I'm once again going to say, can you really blame them? Seriously, can you blame the Democrats? I think that to a degree, they deserve credit because they understand politics. They understand how power works. And so when they get into office, they do their best to maintain power, to advance their political goals. The question really, and you know, okay, you can say, oh, the Democrats are being so aggressive. They shouldn't be doing this. They only won by 1% and they're acting so aggressively. Yeah, that is what they're doing. But if we're not going to do the same, if we're not going to use the political power we have to enact our own goals, kind of going back to the whole rigged election conversation, can we really sit there and complain, right? Can we sit there and complain that the Democrats are being unfair with the gerrymandering when we aren't even following up? We're not even taking our own opportunities to do what you could effectively call our own gerrymandering, but that's what it is. And let's be honest, this is how politics works. This is the game. Both sides try to seize power from another, so play the freaking game. Don't be like Indiana and just sit there and stand down, right? Don't be like the National RNC and don't try to spend money to defeat a referendum that's bad for you. How about the Republicans have some self-preservation and say, oh, wow, the Democrats are using power. Maybe we should do the same, right? Maybe to an extent, Spanberger is a good model of how you should actually try to push your goals ahead when you get elected instead of, standing there and allowing the other side to do it. I don't know. Just some thoughts I have there. Now, the good news, on the other hand, is that there is a perhaps chance, although I wouldn't be super confident, but it is worth noting, the Virginia State Supreme Court is still reviewing the legality of this entire referendum and maybe could strike it down, although I wouldn't keep your hopes up for that.
Before the state Supreme Court decides if it should be tossed altogether. The case centers around whether Virginia lawmakers violated the state's constitution by keeping a special session open for nearly 2 years to pass the measure, which critics call, quote, an abuse of legislative authority.
Well, absolutely. It is an abuse of legislative authority. Really? You kept the special session open for 2 years? How does that even work? Although we also know that Democrats are allowed to break the law flagrantly, oftentimes with immunity in this country, so I wouldn't be super confident about the state Supreme Court, but we'll see what they do. And likewise, it is also an abuse of legislative authority to take 91%, yes, of the districts in a state that you only won by 5%, and then talk about democracy, or whine about Republicans taking 73% of districts in a state they won by 15%, right? Like, the Democrat power grab here is way more substantial, and yes, it could be illegal. At the same time, I'm going to go back to this concept. If Republicans aren't going to fight back against it, if when we have political power, we're not going to act the same, we don't have any right to complain about these people, right? The perpetual victimhood mentality of conservatives for so many decades being these beautiful losers who basically, the left is steamrolling us, but look, we have our principles. That's not fair. You shouldn't be censoring us because of free speech. You shouldn't just be beating the crap out of us in the streets because, political freedom or something. All this whole very loser mentality, obviously, that you're well familiar with, it has to stop. Okay, it has to die. So yes, this is a problem. Yes, this is a power grab, 100%. But now is the time, ladies and gentlemen, for Republican states to step up and do the same. If you haven't redistricted yet, if you have the window of opportunity to do so, if you're not doing so right now, Indiana and others, then you are 100% absolutely dropping the ball. Now, the good news here is that, as the New York Times notes this week, that even if Virginia does get their seats through, Florida, with the special session they're calling just next week, actually could nullify the whole thing and come out of the whole redistricting wars with a Republican advantage. As you can see, they're looking to add up to 5 new Republican seats that would cancel out the Democrats' crazy D1R gerrymandering that I believe adds 4 new Democrat seats. So that would add 5. That would actually be +1 in the end for Republicans. This is assuming that Republicans actually go for broke and, play the game and try aggressively for the whole thing. But as you can see, despite the fact that, as we pointed out, back when the whole Texas situation was happening, Republicans have a built-in advantage when it comes to redistricting, because it turns out in the last census, it's Democrats who gerrymandered extensively. It's Republicans who actually played a lot more fair and have a lot more room to grow. However, according to this New York Times model, as you can see, per the current redistricting wars, because of the fact that rhino states like Indiana just sat there and ended up not doing anything, Ohio ended up doing a very weak redistricting model, the Democrats actually, folks, currently lead the redistricting wars, right? They're beating us right now 2-1, assuming that the Virginia thing goes through. However, if Florida does take that action, that once again puts us back in the advantage. We'd have a net gain of about 1 to 5 new Republican seats. So that's why it is so important. Now, watching what Virginia did and understanding there's no standing down here, right? Making secret deals like the Indiana Republicans did with other state Democrats is not going to work. We have to move full steam ahead. This now is the opportunity. And starting next week, the whole Virginia redistricting push, it turns out, may have completely backfired, assuming that Republicans stay strong and truly, yes, go for broke, add 5 seats instead of adding, 1 or 2 or something like that, because you don't want to piss off the Democrats too much. As you can probably ascertain by now, that is a bad strategy.
He said Florida had both the authority and duty to revisit congressional maps because of population changes and a potential SCOTUS verdict ending the Voting Rights Act. Now, though, Democrats say the hesitation shows his push is on shaky ground, especially with no public maps and no formal public process laid out just days before a scheduled return.
The more they hedge and delay, the less likely it is that we actually go through with this illegal map rigging scheme.
At a Wednesday press conference, Dem leaders called the effort illegal, unnecessary, and politically self-serving.
Now they are infighting about whether to execute an illegal gerrymandering scheme designed to protect their own power.
Yeah, so as per usual, when Democrats do it, it's democracy, but when we do the same thing, it's completely illegal, right? It's totally fair, by the way, for Virginia Democrats to completely rig the referendum by using misleading language about fairness on it, and yet still they almost lost anyway. It was completely legal for them to keep a special session open for 2 years. What the heck is even going on there? But Republicans in Florida are calling a special session that's illegal, which Hakeem Jeffries even came out and said the same thing, calling it an illegal scheme to pick up more redistricting seats. Oh, but when Democrats do that, it's just democracy, right? But let's be completely honest at the same time. I'm going to go back to this again. You have to respect how Democrats know the game of politics and they play it quite well. It is time now, having watched all this happen, having watched the naked power grab in Virginia that should piss you off, yes, the only path for Republicans is forward. We have to do the same thing. We have to counter. And I should point out that although it's looking good in Florida and that the governor obviously is someone who's going to try to fight his hardest, you probably know his track record in terms of terraforming his state and being a hardline conservative when it comes to local governance. At the same time, a lot of the same tomfoolery is still going on, right? Democrats are not just calling it illegal, they're trying to bring lawsuits similarly to the state Supreme Court. Likewise, we have Rhino Republicans who are trying to delay the session because they're not sure, well, maybe we got to do other stuff. Are they going to pull in Indiana in the state Senate? Florida Republicans sometimes have to be pushed very hard by the governor and by the base to do anything. So these are all open questions to watch. The fight is far from over. But, you know, if the Florida GOP gets the job done, then at least, you know, to some degree, even if it's a little bit too late, maybe we should have fought before. We should have tried to make the referendum in Virginia fail. That perhaps, you know, some Republicans somewhere are learning their lesson about not giving an inch to the Democrats, not handing the Democrats free victories. No, we're going to fight back. No, we're going to do the exact same, right? So, which should have been the point of the whole redistricting war to begin with. But unfortunately, we learned about just how bad the Rhino problem still is in our party, right? These people, they claim to have principles. Their only principle is just handing power to the left. You know, that's it. If Indiana a couple months ago said, oh, well, we don't want to add to the partisanship in America. Okay, well, look what Virginia just did, right? Like, Democrats saw you talking about your principles and went full steam ahead. We're going to redistrict anyway. So what was the point of that? Huh? Who is proud? Oh, because you got some praise from mainstream media. CNN said, well, we're so proud of you for standing up to Trump. Suddenly, you know, that makes you a good or virtuous person or something like that, right? Standing with the violent terrorists who assassinated Charlie Kirk and some of our people and just celebrated it, you know? Anyways, I'll get off my soapbox now. But long story short, right? Florida, you got to get the job done. We'll see what happens in the Supreme Court. But national GOP, you got to try. You got to care, right? We could have won this. We should have. But it's unfortunate. But what can you do now? What you got to do now is full steam ahead, red states, right? Like, it happened. So counter what Virginia is doing. Don't pull an Indiana. Okay, anyways, that said, guys, let me know your thoughts. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.